The midday sun beat down on Boya's bustling market, the air thick with the scent of spices, ripe plantains, and the chatter of vendors. Mama Ekwala arranged her tomatoes, her brow furrowed in concentration as she haggled with a customer. Suddenly, the festive atmosphere shattered. A convoy of police pickup trucks screeched to a halt, tires splitting gravel. Uniformed men, some with faces obscured with bandanas, spilled out, their expressions grim. "Everybody, stay where you are!" a gruff voice barked. A tall officer, his name tag reading Inspector Tunlu, strode through the market, a swagger stick swinging menacingly. His eyes, bloodshot and hard, scanned the crowd, picking out targets. The officers moved with practiced efficiency. They targeted the most vulnerable first, the street vendors with their makeshift stalls, and the older women with their baskets of vegetables. "Your papers," they'd yell, even though everyone knew these small-time traders rarely had any. Those who couldn't produce the required documents, or even those who did, if their faces didn't please the officers, were immediately accused of selling contraband or operating without a license. Young men suspected of being amber boys were pulled from the crowd, their shirts ripped, their hands roughly cuffed. Whispers of blackleg, a local term for extortion, spread like wildfire. Mama Ekwala watched in horror as a young apprentice, barely a teenager, was slapped across the face for resisting arrest when he questioned why his wares were being confiscated. Inspector Tunlu stopped at Mama Ekwala's stall. "Your contribution," he demanded, his hand outstretched. Mama Ekwala, her hands trembling, fumbled for the few francs she had earned that day. It was never enough. "More," Tunlu sneered, grabbing a handful of tomatoes and tossing them into a sack. "You think this is a game?" The brutality escalated. A woman who protested the confiscation of her goods was shoved to the ground. A young man who tried to intervene was beaten with a baton. The market, moments before vibrant and alive, was now filled with cries of fear and anger. From the market, the officers moved into the surrounding residential areas. They kicked down doors, accusing residents of harboring criminals. Young men were dragged out of their homes, often without explanation. Money, phones, and other valuables were seized. The residents, terrified, could only watch as their homes were ransacked. One house they targeted belonged to a retired teacher, Pa Mbela. He was accused of inciting violence because he had spoken out against police harassment at a community meeting. They dragged him out, his frail body no match for their aggression. His plea for mercy fell on deaf ears. As the sun began to set, the police convoy finally departed, leaving behind a trail of devastation. The market was in disarray, stalls overturned, goods scattered. The air was thick with tension and resentment. Mama Ekwala surveyed the damage, her heart heavy. The day's earnings were gone, her stock depleted, and the fear lingered. She knew this wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern, a routine. The police, meant to protect them, had become their predators, and in the silence that followed, a quiet anger began to simmer, a seed of resistance planted in the ruins of the day. It was a typical day in Boya, the city's usual buzz and energy, masking the sense of foreboding that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Oblivious to the ominous feeling, Nkungu emerged from his cramped and cluttered room, where dust coated every surface and clothes littered the floor. The small space was a testament to neglect, with a rumpled bed dominating the room and leaving barely enough space to navigate. As he stepped outside, the bright sunlight and cacophony of city sounds offered a stark contrast to the dingy, cramped world he had just left behind. Nkongo stepped out of his house, taking just 10 steps before being confronted by a squad of rough-looking police officers. Their eyes gleamed with a menacing intensity, sending shivers down the spines of passerby. The officers' rugged faces seemed to be etched from years of corruption and abuse of power. With an air of arrogance, they patrolled the streets, preying on unsuspecting individuals to pin false charges on them. Their eyes seemed to gleam with an otherworldly intensity, as if driven by a singular focus on exploitation. They targeted the vulnerable, detaining them on flimsy pretext and extorting from them with ruthless efficiency. Nkongo knew that February 11 was a day of heightened tension, a day that young people feared since the Southern Cameroon crisis escalated in 2017. The crisis fueled by tension between English-speaking and French-speaking regions had led to protests and demand for autonomy, which eventually turned violent. Separatist groups began calling for independence, and youths now feared certain dates like February 11 and October 1st, which often brought increased violence and protests. Nkongo's plan was to grab something to eat at a nearby store and head back home, but trouble seemed to be lurking nearby. "Hey!" one of the rugged-looking officers called out. The voice was the sound of authority gone rotten, corrupted by power and a complete disregard of humanity. Every word dripped with condescension. Every tone was a slap in the face. The voice was a verbal manifestation of the officer's inflated ego, a constant reminder of their self-perceived superiority. Listening to it was like being slowly drained of your will to live. Each irritating inflection and arrogant cadence chipping away at your resolve. Nkongo quickly touched his pocket, but his eye was not on him. He actually didn't think it was too necessary, as he was heading for the nearby store. But for a day like this, it was all you ought to have on you before any other thing. Nkongo has left his small pot of boiling spaghetti on the fire, and at that moment he knew he was not going back home. "Sir, I just wanted to get something to eat." Nkongo's voice was barely audible, a faint whisper that trembled with fear. It was as if his voice cords were paralyzed, unable to produce more than a tiny quivering sound. The words were stuttered, fragmented, and struggled to escape. The voice cracked and faltered, on the verge of collapse, as if he was terrified of being heard or of what might happen if he spoke. It was a voice on the brink of silence, frozen in fear. "Je m'en fiche," he thundered back. It was nothing too surprising. The French police officers were everywhere, almost impossible to come across an Anglophone police officer. Nkongo was confused of what exactly the man said, but one thing was certain: it meant trouble. "Sir, I don't understand. Please, what do you mean?" "C'est le anglophone," a typical insult the French majority always rained on the Anglophone Cameroonians. "Présentez votre carte d'identité," the man ordered. Nkongo didn't quite understand, but he heard identité, which was something common among the bullying officers. It was just an invite to their aggression, and those who fell to it suffered. Nkongo patted his pocket, realizing he had left his ID at home. "Mon ID est à la maison, sir. Ma maison ici," he stammered, struggling to recall the little French he knew. In this part of the country, speaking French was the key to avoiding trouble with the law enforcement, who were predominantly francophone. But Nkongo's Anglophone accent clung to his tongue like a stubborn adhesive. making it hard for him to pronounce even the simplest French words. Entrez dans la voiture, très vite, one of the policemen barked, cutting him off. Nkongo was roughly bundled into the back of a dilapidated police cruiser, its grey paint job worn and faded and fenders rust-eaten and dented. The engine coughed and sputtered as the car launched forward, carrying Nkongo away. Nkongo's spot was ablaze, the gas still on, and his room locked. The entire neighborhood was at risk of being engulfed in flames. His landlord, notorious for his unfriendliness, would surely not hesitate to evict him if the worst happened. "Sir, please, my pot is on fire. Let me go back and turn it off. If not, it will cause a huge casualty," Nkongo pleaded. But Officer Tonglipo, infamous for his corruption, just sneered. "Silence, c'est un problème. Who cares if the whole neighborhood burns down? More homeless people will turn to crime, and that means more work and money for us. Ha ha ha." His laughter sent shivers down Nkongo's spine. A chill cackle, cold as stone, a cruel crescendo that could freeze the night. Nkongo tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, sir, you can come with me. I won't run. Just let me turn off my gas bottle." But Tonglipo's response was a vicious slap that bounced off Nkongo's jawbone. "Si tu oses parler à nouveau, je te frappe avec le dos de mon âme, imbécile." Tonglipo was the dirtiest cop in Boya, with a reputation for framing innocent people and making deals with local scammers. He'd take a cut from every dollar they stole from unsuspecting foreigners on Facebook. With a badge on his chest, Tonglipo peddled corruption, shaking hands with felons and trading favors for bribes. He preyed on drivers, inventing fines for non-existing infractions and relieving them of their hard-earned cash. His pocket was heavy with ill-gotten gains, his conscience numb to the suffering he caused. Fate had dealt Nkongo to cruel hand. Despite his numerous missed calls and unreplied messages to his family, he remained trapped. Upon arrival at the police station, he and others were herded into a crammed room where they were threatened with extortion. A hungry-looking officer barked, "Toi, viens vite," summoning a boy beside Nkongo. This was the routine, selectively calling out detainees to extract bribes in exchange for freedom. Most succumbed to the stench and terror of the cell, relinquishing their cash to the hardened criminals. Nkongo, however, was penniless. When summoned, he begged the officer, "I have no money, sir. My family will bail me out. Please don't send me to the cell." The officer sneered, "I will make sure you sleep inside, imbecile." Nkongo's hair was roughly shaved, his phone seized, and he was dragged to the cell. The walls were adorned with ominous writings and paintings, including a menacing message in crude red letters. "Tuez-les tous." The rough, uneven script appeared to vibrate with malevolent energy, as if the writer's anger and hatred had infused the very walls with a dark, foreboding presence. Being near it made one's skin crawl, as if the words themselves might summon some ancient primal fear. The writings on the wall carried a ghetto entourage, locally referred to as Mboko Rage. The air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy, infusing the surroundings with a dark presence. A prisoner approached Nkongo, saying, "Petit frère, give a Newman tax na 10K. Go see Reby for the quick. This was the notorious Newman tax, a brutal extortion racket run by the prison's ruthless hierarchy. The tax collectors were feared inmates who reveled in terrorizing newcomers. Those unable to pay were subjected to gruesome hazing, forced to stare at faces and urine before being mercilessly beaten. Nkongo trembled. "I have no money, gang." The inmate snarled, "Go stand on top shit now." no waste our time. Disaster struck at Nkongo's home. The unattended pot had overheated, sparking a raging fire that rapidly spread to the nearby rag. Flames engulfed the kitchen, then the bed, and soon the entire room was ablaze. The neighbors, oblivious to the danger, only realized something was amiss when the fire began to spread to their own homes. The community swiftly rallied to combat the inferno, but their efforts were in vain as the fire raged on, fueled by the struggle. Just as it seemed like the flames were being tamed, the gas cylinder exploded, unleashing a massive fireball. The blaze intensified, growing tenfold in thickness and ferocity. Water, once a reliable ally in extinguishing fire, now only seemed to fuel the beast, causing the flames to surge even higher. Yet, despite the seemingly insurmountable challenge, the community persisted in their efforts to quench the fire, and after what seemed like an eternity, the flames finally began to subside, eventually dying down as the people's relentless efforts finally paid off. There was nothing left for Nkongo to come back to. The fire had ravaged everything, leaving nothing but ashes and charred remains. His clothes, vital documents, and even his meager savings had all been reduced to nothing. The only thing awaiting him was a lawsuit from his ruthless landlord, who was determined to make Nkongo pay for the destruction of the house, showing no mercy or compassion for his tenants' loss. It was already nightfall. Nkongo, a prayerful young man, while behind bars at the police custody, whispered little prayers in his heart, hoping God could just turn things around for him. Just at that moment, the cell opened. It was one of the police officers. "Ki Nkongo?" he asked. "Me, sir," Nkongo answered. Finally, his family members had come to bail him out after reading the many texts he left hours ago. Nkongo's heart sank as he approached his home, desperately hoping that the fire he had left behind had been miraculously contained. But this was reality, where miracles were scarce and Nkongo's luck had run out. As he walked up to the house, the pitiful look on his neighbors' faces told a story he couldn't bear to hear. The house was a smoldering ruin, a testament to the devastation that had occurred. But Nkongo's woe didn't end there. His landlord, determined to make him pay for the destruction, threatened to send him to jail. However, after hearing Nkongo's tale of woe, the landlord's heart softened, and he decided to show mercy. The community, moved by Nkongo's plight, rallied around him, treating his case like a charity. Neighbors and well-wishers arrived, bearing gifts of furniture, food, clothing, and other essentials to help him rebuild his life. In the aftermath of the chaos, Nkongo was left to confront the shattered remnant of his life, like a shipwrecked sailor clinging to the debris of his vessel. Consumed by a maelstrom of pain and struggling to come to terms with his new reality, he retreated into the solitude of his home, locking his door and immersing himself in fervent prayer. His pleas for divine intervention were not for himself, but for the policemen who had so callously propelled him towards the precipice of disaster, forever altering the trajectory of his existence. One by one, the officers began to witness a reckoning they would have never wished for themselves. Officer Kiafak, whose soul had been tainted by the corrupting influence of a bribe from a notorious criminal, was now tormented by the vengeful spirit of his victim. The ghost's mournful whispers, like a chilling breeze on the winter's night, echoed through Kiafak's mind, driving him to the brink of madness. His eyes, once bright and alert, now took on a wild, haunted look as he succumbed to the crushing weight of his guilt. As the ghost's whispers grew louder, Kiafak's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would lash out at his colleagues, his words dripping with venom, his fists clenched in rage. The streets, once a place of order and control, now became a battleground, as Kiafak's madness spilled out onto the pavement. His screams echoed through the night, a chilling testament to the terror that had taken hold of his soul. Officer Afuniu, whose deceitful hands had once crafted a web of lies to ensnare an innocent soul, was now paying the price for his corruption. A mysterious and crippling affliction had taken hold of his body, rendering his hands useless and still. The fingers that had once grasped a pen to forge false evidence now lay limp and lifeless, unable to hold even the slightest of objects. As Afaniu gazed upon his immobile hands, a wave of despair washed over him. He was unable to perform even the simplest of tasks, including signing his own name. The irony was not lost in him. The hands that had once brought ruin to another's life were now incapable of even writing their own name. The weight of his corruption had come full circle, leaving him a shell of his former self. Afaniu's condition was a constant reminder to Officer Batumbu, who had once beaten a suspect, of his own mortality. Batumbu was now tormented by terrifying hallucinations, reliving the horrors he had inflicted on others. Batumbu's hallucinations, in turn, awakened the dark past of Officer Moki, who had once protected a corrupt politician. Moki was now trapped in a never-ending nightmare, reliving the traumatic events he had helped to cover up. Moki's anguish resonated with Officer Pius, who had once embezzled funds meant for community programs. Pius was now forced to wander the streets, searching for redemption as the weight of his corruption slowly consumed him. Meanwhile, Officer Tonglo's life was extinguished in a shroud of mystery, his body discovered in a gutter, partially concealed from view. The circumstances surrounding his demise was obscure as the shadows that danced upon the walls, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. And so, the chain of pain continued, each officer's corrupted act in the past coming back to haunt them, a never-ending circle of suffering and regret. The community watched with a mix of horror and vindication, knowing that the corrupt officers had finally been brought to justice. Yet, they also knew that speaking out against the corrupt government was with a price, and so they kept their voices hushed, their words whispered in secrets.
Please subscribe to watch more of our videos. Thank you.